Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. The Road to Autonomy is brought to you in part by Stantec Generation AV. Stantec Generation AV combines some of the most experienced AV experts in the industry with the resources of a global engineering firm. Stantec Generation AV provides education, consulting, assessment, and guidance to any industry interested in autonomous vehicles. Learn more at stantec.com. Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to have Aaron Nathan, founder, CEO, and CTO Point One Navigation. Welcome to the podcast, Aaron.
Thanks for having me, Grayson. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. We've known each other for a while. You're the undisputed king of self-racing cars. You've won it 3 times now. It's coming up again this fall. Are you going to win self-racing cars again? This time it's at Laguna Seca.
I mean, we are definitely going to try. There's a lot of new things happening. Laguna Seca is a very fun venue, and I can definitely say we're excited to show off the tech there.
When you get around the corkscrew autonomously, I'm going to sit there and applause and give you guys a giant high five.
I will very gladly be on the receiving end of this high five.
All right, there we go. It's amazing what we can learn as an industry from the track. Joshua does a really great job of hosting everybody. Your company, Point One Navigation, can try stuff there. We have other individuals that try new technologies. And those technologies, one of the big ones is safety. There's so many safety implications that come, especially from Formula One and even in NASCAR. Safety is becoming, for some individuals, a buzzword. Some individuals, it's being taken seriously. But if you read the newspapers, and I saw this horrific crash recently took place in Los Angeles on the Blair. An individual was going 130 miles an hour into an intersection. She gunned it going into the intersection. They said she was mentally unwell. Well, that was obvious, but the sad part was she killed 6. This raises the question, how do we make cars safer today?
Yeah, it's a tragic incident. And, unfortunately, what's, I would argue, equally or more tragic is the fact that this is a trend where ultimately 2021, I think, was like the highest amount of traffic deaths in the United States in the last 15 years. And that's despite all the advances that we're making in safety technologies on, production vehicles. And so, yeah, I mean, the reality is that, you may not be able to solve for, the individual outliers, but making cars safer using a lot of the technology that companies are developing for autonomous vehicles that actually can be deployed even earlier into the vehicles you and I buy and drive today, I think that they're going to make a huge difference. And this whole category of what we call active safety, I think has a lot of promise. And so ultimately making systems that can detect something is going to happen and then actually do something to avoid those types of tragic incidences, that's really where I think this industry is going to have a big impact in the near term.
We're going to have to do something. You see the data from National Government Highways Association. It seems 100 is the new 80. Speeding is going up. You see police reports, the 100, over 100, over 100, over 100. We saw that tragic incident there. Do incidents such as this, the speeding dilemma, that's, as I said, 100 is the new 80, does that start to swing the public towards autonomous vehicles because they don't get emotionally distressed, they don't get drunk, they don't get high? Driving high is becoming a big nationwide problem. And they don't get distracted. They don't think about things. Does that start to swing the public sentiment towards autonomy? Say, we can go from grandma's house to home safely?
Yeah, I mean, I think that safety is definitely one of the factors. And the reality, though, is that, a lot of the convenience that we'll see from autonomy and convenience at eventually what will be a price point that's going to be lower than what you would have from today, like a traditional taxi or Uber or a Lyft. It will basically make the decision not a decision. There's really no reason to drive anymore. I do think that, there are going to be all the benefits that you said. The computer doesn't drink, it doesn't get high, it doesn't have emotions or breakdowns. But, the reality of the situation is that there's a cultural thing that we have to solve as well. There's probably regulatory that has to come as well. But from the technology side, I definitely do think that there are pieces that this technology will help both in the near term as we develop these types of active safety systems, and then in the longer term as true self-driving vehicles become ubiquitous.
You're right about a cultural shift, and then we might be able to about to go under a huge one. Apple, during the i14 announcement, they announced crash detection. It will be in the iPhone 14. It'll also be in the Apple Watch. If somebody's injured in a crash, you can call 911 and immediately get help. Does that start to raise the public's, say, wait a second, if an incident happens, there's a way that we can get help. The computer already knows what's happening to us.
Yeah, there definitely is. This is the same theme of active safety and being able to make it so that your vehicle is using all the smarts to kind of those convenience features, they turn into safety features. That's really an important thing to understand. And I think companies like Apple, who really value that customer experience, and a lot of the features that they announced at i14 happen to do with safety and feeling that your device is really helping you be safe. That technology, that kind of feeling is something that we're going to see from not just companies like Apple, but also car companies that are building these technologies, focusing on saying, hey, these vehicles with all the smarts and the computers and the sensors that you've been putting in there, they're actually going to save your life potentially in a lot of these types of potentially tragic scenarios. And that's at the end of the day, a really valuable proposition to say that this car could really save your life.
Think about how many lives have been saved from automatic emergency braking. That's saved countless lives. Or lane keep. If somebody's drifting, the vehicle pulls them back in the lane. What new active safety innovations do you see coming down the pipe?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first and foremost, you're going to see a refinement of a lot of these kinds of active safety systems that exist today. In the early days, and arguably on some cars still, some of these safety features, they're actually more annoying than they are helpful. And so people just shut them off, especially like early lane keep assistance. But, as the technology becomes higher fidelity, it really does make it so that the driver is kind of just has this monitoring system behind them and augmenting, decision making that they have, dealing with the, momentary time that you may be distracted, maybe not by your cell phone, but by the, screaming kid in the background. And so these things, they happen because, humans, we are distracted. We're doing multiple things. So all that same logic you just talked about with fully autonomous vehicles apply to these vehicles being deployed today. The other side of this is that as we start to get more sophisticated, these active safety systems can work together. So if you merge kind of things like lane keeping that keeps you, within the travel lane, but then also blind spot detection so that your car doesn't accidentally drift into, the lane next to you. Or let's say that the tractor trailer just hit a gust of wind and now is drifting towards you. Your car is smart enough to know to actually move over and know that the lane adjacent is vacant so it can safely actually cross the travel lane. Those types of very sophisticated behaviors only happen as we start to have higher fidelity sensors. That's what I think is coming next, is really how do you solve for these what look like edge cases, but ultimately can really result in horribly tragic accidents.
Blind spot detection, my favorite use of blind spot detection personally is backing out of the driveway. So there's hedges on both sides of my driveway and you can't see, and it goes beep, 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 beep. And then 5 seconds, 10 seconds later, you see a car come by. I'm like, this is great use of the technology. It's working. You mentioned sensors. There's been this long debate, I would say long 5 years, of LiDAR, radar. Now we have 4D radar. Oh, this is going to cost too much money. We can't put it in the vehicle. Do you see the cost of sensors coming down and where they'll be put in the vehicles in the coming model years, say 26, 27?
Yeah, I think it's two factors. Of course, like the sensors are definitely getting cheaper and, more geared for mass production, particularly sensors that you would see on like some of these prototype robotaxis. Many of them are hand built, so there's no actual way to scale those. And so part of the innovation is, how do we take sensors that are more mass production ready and use them on vehicles that you and I would buy potentially, or a robotaxi operator would actually deploy in mass? The other, I think, important piece here is that by combining different types of sensors together, we're actually starting to get better than the kind of single sensor mentality that was very popular a few years ago. So there were lots of companies that said we could do everything with cameras, or you can do everything with LiDARs, or pick your favorite sensor. I think now companies are starting to realize that actually sensor fusion, blending different types of sensors together, you can get the best of all worlds. And at the end of the day, actually even save costs because now you can use lower fidelity sensors, but just different, many numbers of them together. I think that's what you're going to start to see in like production vehicles.
Will that be a trend that will be introduced by the typical tier one automotive suppliers? Will it work on the sensor fusion, or do you see a startup that's really cracked it to do it?
I think that it's going to be a blend. Tier ones and those types of companies, they bring a lot of experience into how to make things in mass. So a lot of those like production questions I was talking about, that's their expertise. Testing to get safety certifications, things that, are just very difficult for, the classical startup type of mentality to do. At the same time, vehicles are basically becoming rolling software platforms. And so this is a place where startups have just been able to innovate at a pace that is not possible within an existing kind of tier one organization. And so what we've seen be most successful are these partnerships where you work very closely with a tier one or sometimes directly with a modern OEM. And those are things that really have, when you look at the vehicles that are successful out there today, those are a result usually of those types of collaborations.
We're starting to see a very large trend of companies are moving to their own chip architecture. Apple's famously done it with the M1, the M2. Cruise announced that they're working on their own chips. Well done, Kyle and team, on that. I'm a big fan of what you're doing with your own chip architecture. Google's going to do their own chip architecture. Amazon at some point will probably do their own architecture. In Zoox, when these companies start doing their own chip architecture, you see the advantages for Apple. I have an M1 product. I've got better battery life. It's faster. Will that same thing go into automotive as well? Will it be cheaper, faster, more reliable?
Yeah, I think for certain tasks, it's definitely the case. The oldest example of this is actually Mobileye, arguably one of the most widely deployed systems out there. Their device, it is a chip that is specifically designed. And the reason for this is automotive has immense scale. And so, it's cell phones, obviously, and why Apple and Google have built their own chips. There's a lot of scale there, but in automotive, these chips are becoming one of the most expensive pieces of the vehicle. And so being able to make them bespoke to the problem that they're solving reduces cost, reduces power, which in electric vehicles turns into range. These are all things that are good. And so it makes perfect business sense that you would try to optimize that piece of the puzzle.
Apple is notorious for optimization, vertical integration. We mentioned crash detection earlier. Their CarPlay, they've shown videos of what the new CarPlay will look like. They filed the trademark for augmented reality with Reality One. Does Apple take their chip architecture and start to further move into the vehicle?
I wouldn't be surprised. Ultimately, whether they build a car or whether they're trying to build a better experience in the car, I think that ultimately Apple is all about the customer experience, that user experience, bringing kind of like your digital world along with you into the physical world and making those two things almost be one. The reality is we spend a lot of time in cars. And so it makes perfect sense that if your company's goal is to kind of be the interface, the whole digital world, that you would want to own that platform, control that experience, and provide something that you believe is going to be the quality that represents your brand. And obviously that's extremely important to Apple. So a lot of the technology that you need to do augmented reality is almost identical to what you need to do autonomous driving. It's about having mapping, having accurate location, having perception. All of those types of things have to work flawlessly to make the augmented reality experience something that's not nauseating, basically. I think that's already, you can see it just in what is on the latest iPhone, that those experiences are nothing short of amazing.
What I see with Apple, I'm not going to make a prediction if they're going to build a car or not, or they're going to be the OS. What I see is Tim Cook positioning the company to develop a new app store around augmented reality that can eventually go into the car and creates a whole new revenue stream, which continues to grow their services business. I think that becomes really interesting. Apple could perhaps license an AV stack. We're seeing announcements. Argo is putting out there very publicly that they're going to license their stack. If Argo does license their stack to other companies, does that make this come down to a two-horse race for robotaxis between Waymo and Cruise based on their deployments and their ability to raise capital?
Yeah, I mean, building a robotaxi is a highly capital intensive business, which is why I think, you've seen it kind of, there's been a lot of attrition, a lot of mergers. And, I do think, Waymo and Cruise are doing amazing work in that regard. However, I do think that once this technology is to a point of maturity, rideshare, like all other applications, become a little bit separate from the technology. And so there is certainly, I think, some of the legacy players, and I wouldn't be surprised even new players. So, Uber and Lyft, obviously, they have the largest rideshare fleets in the world. I don't think that, they're not going to at least work with other companies to license that. We see that with Motional today. And ultimately, I do think that it will come down to consumer choice and potentially other parts of the experience that those customers are going to be focused on. And we'll see. It'll be a very interesting place to see innovation there in really how you can differentiate that customer experience when literally there's no driver in the vehicle.
100% spot on about customer experience. I've said this for a long time, on the record many times. I'm going to say it again. At some point, Louis Vuitton will go in the autonomous vehicle space. They will not build an AV. They will license a stack from a third-party provider and build the interior. And where the interesting part becomes, it becomes a Louis Vuitton platform because their whole company was based historically on travel. You go for a ride in that vehicle, you can buy certain select handbags. It becomes a TikTok and Instagram phenomenon. That's a very profitable ride. Louis Vuitton's margins are 44%. So you're buying a $7,000 handbag with a 44% margin. You've got the most profitable AV rides in history.
Yeah, I mean, in the minimum, it's certainly a captive audience. Not to reduce your story, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of the you remember the Air Mall catalogs they had back then?
Yes.
I mean, it is a little bit of that. I'm sure commerce will be a big part of autonomous vehicles, but in the meantime, I do think there's going to be a lot of innovation there about providing these experiences that are magical. And like I said, I think that's what excites companies, like Apple, who are trying to figure out what is the next chapter of engaging people in this kind of digital analog world hybrid that we're creating.
The future of mobility will be defined by brands and experiences. That's called the interior of the vehicle, the augmented glass in the vehicle. But to scale the AVs from a technical perspective, it's really, really hard. It's a multi-billion-dollar problem. In your opinion, what's needed to truly scale autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, I mean, there's two different scaling arcs as I see it. What you have first are how do you scale robotaxis? Because those are managed fleets of vehicles, and that also applies to things like delivery trucks and these big Class 8 trucks that people are building to deliver goods. That's about reducing cost, making the efficiency of those vehicles higher, making it so the sensors don't cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, but maybe cost thousands of dollars. So we still have like 100x improvement to go there. I think that, there's this other question of people wanting to have their individual cars be autonomous. It's a completely different problem because now the costs are even more sensitive. The experience is very different. And all of those sensors, they're not, professionally maintained anymore. And you think about some of the cars I see driving on the road, the bumper's barely hanging on. I mean, so there's a whole other world of problems to solve. The companies that are trying to promise, full self-driving to, a car that you can buy in a showroom, that's a really, really difficult problem. And I think is much further away than most people think.
What role do you see Point One playing in scaling AVs?
Yeah, I mean, so Point One, what we do is we provide, kind of one of the core foundational layers of both automated and autonomous vehicles, which is just telling them where they are. So very simply, like we provide the grid over which like all cars identify everything from other cars to buildings to roads to where the lanes are, et cetera. And so the way I see it is like we're the common language that the cars can use to talk about where they saw something. There's a hazard in the second lane at mile mark 65, or the fact that hey, they've restriped the 101, and so we've got to be aware of that. This is fundamentally, we call like the absolute frame. It's one of the most important things that I think actually in the long run will make it so that automated vehicles actually can drive better than humans because they have the ability to communicate perfectly with one another and have perfect memory about what they saw. Two things that humans have no way of doing. The only way that you can make that useful, though, is that you have to be able to talk intelligently and very accurately about where things are in the world. That's what we provide.
Will absolute frame report traffic patterns if there's an unusual backup?
It becomes trivial to do that because now if all the cars, know exactly where they are, it becomes like almost as easy as looking at a computer game. And so ultimately, all of those types of problems of being able to not even just say where there's traffic patterns, but like what is the average queuing time at this intersection? What is the probability that people run this stop sign even before the vehicles are automated? You can start to see really these micro trends at the lane level and even below the lane level, which had never existed before. That's a really, really amazing, powerful, just one part that falls out of precise location.
Powerful is an understatement. I want to give you a scenario here. I'm just going to use experiences. Let's say, for instance, you're down in the Florida Keys. It's 2 lanes in, 2 ways out, and sometimes it gets backed up and it could take you a long time to get to Miami, and you have an individual staying at a resort. Could they get a push notification on their phone and says, "Hi, vehicle, we suggest that you leave 2 hours later because of the traffic pattern getting into Miami"?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we could even tell you that, hey, the traffic pattern in Miami is such that you should be in lane 1 instead of lane 2 in real time. Because ultimately, that's a lot of times, there's an accident. You don't know if it's on the left or the right side of the highway. When you've got a 6-lane highway, it makes a big difference. And so those are the kinds of things that our technology can help with even today.
Think about one for a human driven. We're going to get to autonomous in a minute. How much frustration that you'll get rid of. I forget, there's that funny Steve Martin movie. He has to go in the gas station. He's frustrated because he won't read the map.
Yeah.
You eliminate the map.
Yeah. I mean, the way I kind of look at it is it's like what high definition TV did to sports. If you ever try to watch a hockey game, like, that's from the 90s, it's like you can't even tell where the puck is. The reality is that, what we've done is 10 centimeter level accuracy on maps. I mean, it's game changing to what you can see. And we've shown like professional people that have worked in the map industry 20 years, like demos of what we've done. And they're just like, I can't believe how smooth and how accurate this is. That's the experience. Again, back to that whole other conversation of, tying the digital and the physical worlds together. That's a building block that we're enabling.
You're enabling seamless autonomy when we get to autonomous vehicles. There's no more guessing game. There's no more waiting. You're going to allow that family to have an extra 2 hours at the resort, and they're going to come home happy and relaxed because of your technology. From a technical standpoint, how are you able to get centimeter level absolute accuracy?
The answer is that we do a lot of the sensor fusion. So I mentioned before, like companies merging their LiDARs and their radars together. We do the same thing with position sensors. Even in your phone today, you have what's called an IMU. It kind of tells you the direction of your phone. Your phone has a GPS receiver. We use those. And we even use other things on cars that you wouldn't expect, like the sensors for your anti-lock brake system. And we use a very high fidelity physics model of what the vehicle can do. Basically, there's a lot of math that we put together, and what that does is it outputs an extremely accurate position and orientation of the vehicle. Those two things by themselves are highly useful. But on top of that, we also can tell how accurate those estimates are, because sometimes there are situations where we may not have the perfect answer. But being able to tell your autonomy stack, especially before full autonomy, hey, like the system is not available right now, you should take control and do that in a safe way. That's been another thing that we really focus on. And so ultimately, that sensor fusion is one of the key aspects. There's a lot of other behind the scenes work, infrastructure that we've built, modeling, and ultimately there's just a ton of work that goes into it. But at the end of the day, like the result is very simple. It's just a very accurate point in a very accurate direction.
What type of infrastructure is needed to scale this?
Yeah, I mean, so infrastructure-wise, one of the key things we had to do was understand, the errors that are present in things like GPS. In order to do that, we've deployed almost 1,000 of these monitoring stations all across the world. What they do is they track all the different satellites that are in space today. And basically what we do is we look at what are the errors on those different satellites. We build a whole bunch of very complicated physics-based models. And very similar how we predict the weather. We're actually able to predict what the errors are on all of these different types of satellites. And not even just satellites, we're able to do this also with other sensors like barometric pressure sensors that you would find in cars and phones. By basically using these highly sophisticated models, you're able to reduce 99% of the error that's actually in those signals. And so that allows us to say, okay, typical GPS we've all used like on our phones. Most of the time will tell you what street you're on, except if you're in downtown somewhere. Our stuff will tell you what lane you're in all the time. That's a really powerful thing for a car, especially if you're trying to make it drive itself. But even before then, when you're just trying to do, frankly, even applications where it's not necessarily even safety, but think about logistics, folks who are dropping off packages, needing to know where they're going very accurately, even connecting, the Lyft driver and their passenger, all those types of applications. Way before we have autonomy, location actually can make those experiences far more, what's the word, but like ultimately make those experiences more correct. And that's really what Point One is doing, is enabling accuracy to make things actually work. That's kind of the whole idea.
How many errors do satellites and sensors give off?
It's a lot. I mean, you have to think like these satellites, they're roughly 25,000 kilometers away, orbiting in space at unfathomable speed. And so here we are, able to pull out centimeter level positions from this thing that's in space, moving very quickly. And the only way that we're able to do that is by compensating for all the different types of, physics-based things that happen to these satellites, literally changes of the speed of light due to the fact that the atmosphere has different ionospheric properties. It's a lot of really cool physics, but our whole goal as a company is that our customers don't need to deal with all of that. It's kind of like when you make a phone call, you don't have to think about how complicated LTE is, as a thing. You can just, call your mom and it works, That's the kind of experience we're trying to build for developers, where they just want position so that they can go and build whatever it is, a car, a lawnmower, a delivery robot. And that's really what we've been able to do.
Your customers just want it to work, plain and simple.
Yeah.
You were the project leader and team founder for the Cornell University's entries into the DARPA Grand Challenge and the DARPA Urban Challenge. Is that where your love of location really starts, since those were two massively challenging contests that you had to get through?
Absolutely. I mean, I was a computer vision engineer throughout school, and this was kind of an amazing opportunity. It was the genesis, frankly, of everything that we see today in self-driving vehicles, were these DARPA challenges 15 years ago or so. That really showed me that, yes, there were obvious problems in perception. We need better LiDARs. Or frankly, there weren't LiDARs, barely existed in the first one. We were borrowing sensors off of like forklifts back then. And at the same time, though, like the main reason most vehicles were failing were not due to perception. They were actually failing because they were driving right off the road. And that was what I realized very quickly, was that you need to make sure that you know where you are so that you can stay on the road. And frankly, what's so powerful about location is that it tells you what to expect ahead of time. And so even when you're talking about like building better LiDARs and perception and all that, you can do this amazing thing that says, well, if I know where I am, I know what I can expect. I know what the road already looks like because I have a map. So I know that vehicles are probably going to be coming in the opposite direction on a divided highway. So I don't need to worry about something that's coming at me at 60 miles an hour because it's on the other side of the highway. This, what we call in the business, the prior, the ability to know what to expect. That is actually one of the most powerful sensors that no one really talks about externally. And I think that that's why we dedicated building this whole company, so that people could reliably get that information and then condition everything else, whether you're using cameras, radars, LiDARs, it doesn't matter. Knowing what to expect only makes those things better.
It's only making them better. You mentioned drive off roads. Yes, that was well documented. They also drove into fences
Yep.
and kept going.
Oh, yeah.
You fundamentally have to know where you're going. And if you're out in Victorville going around a base, you don't want to go into the wrong area.
Yes.
Location is valid. It's a problem that's not talked enough about. I'm very proud that you built Point One and that you're scaling this. And you have a public customer in Faction, the autonomous vehicle delivery startup. Did they choose you because of the centimeter level accuracy, or was it just a great friendship? Why did they choose Point One?
I mean, I think that the reality is that we love working with the Faction team for a bunch of different reasons, but one of them is that they're building a product that they're trying to bring to market today, and they're doing it very quickly while still maintaining a high degree of safety. The only way that you're going to do that is by using mature, tried, and tested technologies. And so I think they chose us because, I mean, they tested lots of different systems and they saw that, our system was reliable. It was something that was ready to go, and it was incredibly easy for their developers to integrate into the stack. Now, of course, companies like Faction who are building autonomous vehicles, they're building lots of redundancy into the system. That's how you achieve safety. And so Point One is one of their navigation systems, and they're also, I'm sure, using lidars and other things just like other companies. But the reality is that we were able to save them a ton of time and deliver something that would increase the safety and reliability of their platform. And that's critical for any company. But I love working with the Faction guys just because they really take that stuff seriously.
Safety and reliability are key. So you're working, let's call that an autonomous vehicle company. Will you eventually expand into autonomous trucks, which they have to know where they're going? They need accuracy. Drones, you have all the FAA regulations. Will you expand into those two markets?
I would say we actually are already in those markets. We have some unannounced customers we'll be able to talk about soon, I hope, in both industries. The reality is that anything that moves is a customer for Point One. Because if you're operating in the physical world, your system needs to know where it is. That's kind of my whole thesis around building outdoor robotics, or even building outdoor systems that need to have a digital counterpart, like that, delivery driver. Those are things that ultimately will benefit both from safety and efficiency by having precise location.
I'll say this, and I've said this to you privately many times. I'll say this on record. I'm very proud of what you built at Point One, and I wish you nothing but success, because you're onto something special. Even though you can't reveal who the partners are, something in my gut tells me that they're very big partners. So go Team Point One, go Aaron. You mentioned anything that moves. My thinking a lot has been in maritime. There's been a lot of investments in blue tech. Ships move. They move all over the world. Maersk, one of the world's largest shippers, pays 11.24% dividend. They're spitting off cash, so that's a very healthy industry. At some point, will Point One move into maritime because ships move?
It is entirely possible. Ships are also huge. And so they do surprisingly actually use precise location today. One of the earliest kind of enhancements to GPS was called DGPS, and it was specifically designed for boats being able to come into port and not hit things called shoal, where there's basically the rocks and stuff like that underground. And so, I mean, it's definitely an industry that's interesting. For us, there's so much on land and in air that we're starting there. But we've definitely had conversations with folks, even in recreational boating. And I think that there's a lot of the same safety concerns. And also, I mean, at the end of the day, boating should be fun. And the closer you can get that to be autonomous too, you can have fun on the water and not have to worry about other problems.
I can see it. Let's just say you map marinas around the world, precise location, docking and undocking. That's where a majority of the crashes happen, especially in pleasure boats. You eliminate that and think about this. Let's say there's a place in the Atlantic, half a mile off from shore that's known to have a lot of fish. Say, okay, boat, drive to fishing spot. And it goes and you fish and you have a great time with your family. Say, okay, boat, go home. It takes you home. That's a great experience.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, I think, the great part about Point One is that, we don't build those experiences per se, but we get to power the companies that are passionate about each one of those types of, they're trying to create magic for their customers. And so that's something that, I think is a great idea and could be a fantastic expansion for any boat company. And honestly, like pleasure boats is a fantastic category. It's in the name, it's like, so yeah, by all means.
It's all going to come down to location. Let's go back on land. We went out to sea. We went fishing. We caught a lot of fish. We did good. On land, there's consolidation coming in the autonomous vehicle passenger car side and the autonomous trucking side. It's coming. Market conditions are pointing to it. What are your thoughts on that coming consolidation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the natural course of things, like independent of macroeconomy factors. The hype cycle of autonomous vehicles is real, and I think that there's a lot of excitement, a lot of maybe unrealistic or optimistic timelines, and now I think companies are starting to realize that there are, maybe a lot of things that we have to figure out still to get to full level 4 autonomy, which is where a lot of these business models need to get to make sense. But then also, we've created a lot of technology that can be valuable in the near term. And so we're starting to see a rebirth almost of interest in things like what the industry calls level 3 technology, where you can have conditionally hands-free driving. I've always actually still been a big believer in that, despite it, almost being something that was taboo for a little while. But ultimately, if you can make the highway drive almost entirely unmonitored, that's one of the most boring times to drive. And so if you think about, value to the customer, that's actually one of the ways that we'll see, people always ask, when am I going to have a self-driving vehicle in my driveway? The answer is going to be that, it will be conditional, and we'll have hopefully proper monitoring systems and things like that so that they're operated safely. And, at the end of the day, it'll provide this like natural path. And that's how we'll get to eventually, actual ubiquitous level 4 autonomous vehicles.
Mercedes-Benz in Europe is slowly rolling out SAE level 3. And you think about the boring drives, LA to San Francisco going through the grapevine, that would be wonderful to sit there on level 3. And when you get into the Bay Area, you take over. You're refreshed. You're relaxed. The big issue that I have and the concern is, how do you ensure that the driver's attentive when it's time to take over? It's the beep, 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 beep. What do you think that best way to get that driver's attention when they take over from level 3?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole study in HMI of, whether they're beeps, whether it's the seat buses, all kinds of these different fun things. I think the biggest challenge is the amount of notice that you can give the driver. And so ultimately that boils down to how good is your sensor system and your perception system, so that the handover can be done in a way that the human has enough time to take over in a safe way. And I think, companies like Mercedes have spent a huge amount of time, not just building the technology, but also getting regulators comfortable in, frankly, places that are notoriously difficult, like in Germany, for regulation. And I think that that's a testament to them investing very heavily in how do we use sensor technology to get to that level of safety where that handoff can be done in a way that's responsible.
I'll give you an example. It should come down to location. Perhaps there's an individual riding in a system with a GM Super Cruise, and it's, say, 15 miles away from where the system's going to turn off. You start a series of actions to get the attention. Do you see what I see, where location will play a very precise location, for that matter of fact, will play a very important, critical role in this?
It already is. I can't mention customers, but Point One technology is being used in multiple OEMs today to do that exact same thing. Even before full level 3, these are still in what people call level 2 plus systems, but ultimately are being used for highway assistance. And basically the cars are aware of where they can function with a high degree of reliability. And once they leave that area, the car says, hey, like, you've got to take control now. And it can do that in a very responsible way because it knows very accurately where it is, very accurately where it can operate safely. And then once it exits that zone, it says, okay, Grayson, now you're in San Francisco. It's time for you to drive.
It's smart. It's a really smart way until we can achieve level 4. It will save lives, and at the same time, it will improve the driving experience. Aaron, putting this all together, in your opinion, what is the future of precise location services?
I think that, precise location will become something that people take almost for granted. The reality is that how we're all just used to everything from having, very fast internet connection in our pocket, no matter where we are, having 4K TV, having like these things that, 15 years ago, I mean, you'd think were impossible. Precise location is just the natural evolution. Now, what I think is really going to change here, though, is it's going to enable not just people to do amazing things, but also to allow machines to now start to interact into the physical world in ways that, we've only dreamed about in science fiction. So whether you're talking about delivery robots, whether you're talking about, drones delivering packages, all of those types of things are going to be enabled by precise location. And so I'm excited for that to really become something that, we all just expect. And, Point One will be behind the scenes powering a large chunk of that market.
I could make the argument Point One's going to power convenience.
I mean, I hope so. I mean, ultimately, technology's job is to make the world safer and more convenient, in my opinion. So mission accomplished, I hope.
You're getting there. Will you eventually go into ag? Since there's a lot of precision in ag.
Oh, absolutely. And, we have customers in that sector as well. And I would say ag is a pretty wide definition. I mean, think about, everyone knows what a Roomba is. Why can't your Roomba also be your lawnmower? And we see actually a huge pull from all of the, existing guys who make lawnmowers wanting to use precise location technology so that you can just tell the thing once, where your tulip garden is, and then it will very nicely respect that bed of flowers and mow the rest of your grass. And I mean, it sounds silly, but I mean, what a beautifully simple application. And if you can make the technology inexpensive enough, it makes a ton of sense. And so actually, I think it's next year or like this coming year, Sweden will sell more unmanned lawnmowers than manned lawnmowers. Like, so when I say like it will be ubiquitous, I really do mean it. It's going to be a huge change in the next decade.
I can't wait for the autonomous lawnmower. I like that. It won't run over the tulips. It's great. And it will always ensure that my grass is cut right. I want to automate my pool cleaning now because I talked to the Roombas. Okay, clean up now. And it cleans my house up and it does a really, really good job. And again, it comes down to location because it's smart enough not to go on the rug and get stuck and say, hello, Grayson, I'm stuck. It's smart enough because of location. And Aaron, as we look to wrap up this insightful, fun conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them today?
I think we've covered some great ground here. If there's one thing, it's just that location is one of the most important kind of invisible sensors in all of robotics, not just self-driving vehicles. And that I think it's one of those key enablers that will be there, and it will bring about a large amount of convenience and safety, and makes for some magical experiences.
Without location, there is no autonomy because the future is bright. The future is autonomous, and the future is Point One. Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the road to autonomy today.
Thanks for having me, Grayson. Had a great time here.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter at Road to Autonomy or email podcast@brulteco.com. The Road to Autonomy is produced by Brulte & Company. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Brulte & Company. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, tax, investment, or business advice.